Disney Fairies brand has been basically dead for the past decade. The last Tinkerbell movie came out in 2015, and Disney pretty much stopped making media or merchandise for the fairies after that. Tinkerbell the character hasn't gone away. You can still get, like, Tinkerbell Christmas ornaments and dolls and whatnot. But the Disney Fairies brand of Tinkerbell and her friends living in Pixie Hollow, that seems to be discontinued. But recently, there has been some new Disney Fairies content that has gotten me excited. This includes a theme park ride, graphic novels, and 2 books, one of which I have right here. So let's start with the book I have. This book is called Tinkerbell and the Lost City, and it came out on November 5th, the only good thing to happen on that day. This book is part of a series called the Bleakwatch Chronicles. So none have been announced yet, but we can assume that there are going to be more Bleakwatch books. The premise is that Tinkerbell goes to a steampunk fairy city on the mainland, which is the human world. That premise might sound familiar to some of you diehard Disney Fairies fans, because it is the premise of a cancelled 7th Tinkerbell movie. The movie had the working title Tinker Academy. The premise, as we understand it, is that there is a secret school for Tinker talent fairies on the mainland. Based on the concept art we have, it was in the ruins of a human castle. We have art that looks like a classroom in a ruined tower, and fairies using some kind of zip line. And Fairy Mary, who's the leader of the Tinker talent fairies, had been accepted into the school and was leaving to go. This is based on an animatic that we have. But as she's leaving, a new fairy arrives in Pixie Hollow, and that new fairy turns out to be Tinkerbell. And as we know, Tinkerbell is a very talented, powerful Tinker talent fairy, and we could tell that immediately from the talent choosing ceremony. So Fairy Mary knows that Tinkerbell is going to need a lot of help and guidance, so she decides to stay behind and reapply to the school next year.
It's the right thing to do. I mean, she actually has the word tinker in her name, for goodness sake.
But Tinker Academy is your dream, and you've waited so long.
Yes, but a talent such as this, it's a rare thing. It must be nurtured, guided by only the most experienced hands.
But surely there must be someone else.
You and I both know there isn't. So it's settled. I'm staying.
Then we have concept art and an animatic of Tinkerbell arriving at the entrance to the school and figuring out how to enter. She takes some kind of gear key and puts it in a door in a cave. Then she sees the Tinker Academy campus. Then we have various pieces of art of the classrooms, including one that even says Tinkerbell 7 on the bottom. And there's art of what looks like extracurricular clubs or groups or something. So somehow, for some reason, Tink would have gone to this school. We also have art of Tink in a very steampunk outfit with goggles and a corset and glowing shoes, and concept art of other characters. The character sheet refers to them as City Tinkers. There seems to be another main character named Ember, and a cast of side characters whose names are Quantum, Forge, Dynamo, Jules, and Torque. And that's basically all we know. We don't know what the plot was going to be, or why there's a Tinker school on the mainland in the first place. Why does Fairy Mary even have to apply to this school? How many Tinker talents are there who want to go? Because the only Tinker talents and the only fairies we know about are from Pixie Hollow. Are there fairies from outside Pixie Hollow who are also applying to this school? We don't know. A Hollywood Reporter article from 2014 said, a 7th Tinkerbell film, which would have been Tinker Academy, was scrapped last fall because of story problems. So maybe the writers didn't know the answers to those questions either. And we know, 10 years on from this article, that they never ended up making a 7th Tinkerbell movie. The Tinkerbell movies were direct to DVD, and DVD sales were declining in the 2010s. And Disney Toon Studios, the studio that was animating these movies, ended up shutting down. I mainly wanted to bring up Tinker Academy because I think it's interesting that Disney is returning to this concept of secret steampunk fairies. I'm using the word steampunk. Obviously, they're not using steam power. They have magic. But they're using, like, gears and clockwork and metal machinery, and it has that sort of Victorian aesthetic, corsets and trousers and whatever. Which I think makes sense for Tinkerbell, because Tinkerbell has a very rustic aesthetic, and steampunk is like technology without being too modern. And with the timeline of Peter Pan, the human world is in this sort of Victorian era. There's not really plot similarities between Bleakwatch and Tinker Academy, I mean, as far as we know, but there's definitely an aesthetic similarity, which I'm very cool with. Fairies with retro gadgets is a vibe I can get behind. I also just like sharing concept art of canceled Tinkerbell projects, because I think more people should see this stuff. Character design and illustration is so impressive. I think partially because those are art skills that I do not have, which, if you're like me and those are skills that you'd like to learn, you may be interested in the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes in tons of different categories. Graphic design, photography, music production, coding, creative writing, self-care, anything you can think of, basically. Whether you want a skill that you can use in your career or just as a hobby. Skillshare has lots of classes on character design and different areas of illustration. I liked this character illustration class by Sarah Holiday, not just because she spells her name the way that I do, which is the correct way. She focused on making the characters very expressive. You can filter Skillshare classes by software or material. So like if you specifically want classes using Adobe Illustrator or Canva or Final Cut Pro. There are also learning paths, which are curated collections of classes to master a specific skill. So you can follow multiple classes in order, like this Procreate Basics class, which would be great for illustration. If you want to learn character illustration or something else, you can join Skillshare to learn a new skill from scratch or master a skill you already have. If you're interested in trying Skillshare, you can click my link in the description. The first 500 people to use my link will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Now let's get to the plot of Tinkerbell and the Lost City. We open with a new fairy named Elmira. She's flying in some sort of mechanical contraption. It's like a pod. She's like fully inside of it. It's made of metal and it's powered by pixie dust. And Elmira is flying this contraption in the rain and over the ocean. Now, if you don't know, water is very bad for fairies because their wings are like a sponge. So if they get caught in the rain, then their wings get all heavy and they can't fly. And if they get caught in a body of water, then their wings cause them to sink. So she's trying to navigate through the rain through like thunder and lightning. And she's almost out of pixie dust, which if she runs out, then she's going to crash into the ocean and she's going to sink and drown. Very high stakes. And we find out that she is not from Pixie Hollow. She's traveling from somewhere else. There's a line, she needed to reach Neverland before anyone realized she was gone. She just barely makes it to the shore of Neverland and crashes on the beach. Then we switch point of view to Tinkerbell. She's going to go collect some lost things. Lost things are things from the mainland, from the human world, that have washed up on the shores of Neverland. So she's going to the beach. And the Tinker Fairies Clank and Bobble are coming to help her, which they're not actually being particularly helpful, because she's like, hey, can one of you take a turn pulling the wagon? And they're both like, oh no, I don't want to pull a wing. You two doofuses. Tink and the boys make it to the beach and they find some lost things. And then Tink comes across Elmira's flying machine, which is like buried in the sand. And Tink is like, it's weird that this is almost like fairy-sized. And they dig it out of the sand and they open it up and they're shocked to find a fairy inside. A fairy who none of them have met before. And Elmira's passed out. So Tink sends the boys to go get the healing talent fairies, have them finally do something useful. And Tink stays behind and sits with Elmira. She notices that Elmira is wearing, like, human clothes. The Pixie Hollow fairies all wear clothes made out of natural materials, so, like, leaves and flowers and stuff. And it's sort of implied that they're preserved through pixie dust. But Elmira is wearing clothes made of fabric and in a very human style. She also is wearing a circular brass bracelet. Then Elmira wakes up, but she can't talk. She, like, gestures at her throat. So the two of them communicate through, like, drawing and miming. We learn that her name is Elmira. She's from the mainland. She draws a clock and then gestures, like, a big clock. And Tinkerbell is like, oh, like Big Ben, like the clock from the mainland. And Elmira's like, how do you know about that? because this book is set after the 6 movies. So Tinkerbell has visited the mainland a few times, and in the 3rd movie, she even flies around Big Ben. There's a line that's like, Tink was a very worldly fairy, which is true. We also learn that Elmira has lost a necklace on the mainland, and she desperately needs it back. And then she passes out again. Then the healing talents come, and they're asking Tink all of these medical questions, like, what's her talent? What's her arrival day? Tink's like, I don't know. They're like, who should be her emergency medical contact? And Tink is like, I know the answer to that question. Me! So the healing talents take Elmira away. Then, of course, Tink decides that she's going to fix up the flying machine in secret. And she's fascinated by all the, gears and machinery and stuff. And then once she fixes it up, she decides that she is going to take the flying machine, go to the mainland, and try and find this necklace. Apparently Tink has a stockpile of extra pixie dust that she can use, so she doesn't have to ask anyone for pixie dust and let them know that she's planning on doing this quest. Operating very much on asking for forgiveness and not permission. She very successfully operates the machine. The only minor hiccup is when she's trying to land. She, stops the flow of pixie dust and starts to crash, and she realizes, oh, you have to, do it slowly. But other than that, it goes very smoothly. I think it's supposed to be well, it's Tinkerbell. She's very good with gadgets. She just figured it out. Whereas, if you put me in an unfamiliar car, I would be a hazard to myself and others, and I know how to drive a car. This is a never-before-seen flying machine. Whatever. So she lands in Kensington Gardens, and she hides the machine, under some leaves or whatever. Then, because she doesn't have any other leads, she decides to go fly around Big Ben and see if anything materializes. Which it does. 5 fairies immediately try to rob her. These fairies seem to need her pixie dust, and we get a line that gives us sort of an insight into what's going on with them. We're already behind on our quota, another of the 5 answered gruffly. Maddox doesn't pay scavengers who can't make their numbers. You want to run out of dust and end up at the factory? Tink initially tries to talk them down, and then when talking isn't working, she picks the weakest fairy and, flies at him and takes his book and throws it to the ground. Then there's, a scuffle where Tink is, sabotaging all these fairies' gadgets. And they're like, who are you? And Tink is like, I'm a tinker you don't want to mess with. Which now that she's mentioned she's a tinker, now they're interested. I'm Quinn, and these are the Flutterpunks. We're the most infamous band of trinket scavengers to ever fly the mean streets of Bleakwatch. Side note, Quinn is non-binary and uses they-them pronouns, which was very exciting. So there's Quinn, who's the leader. Then there's the twins, Danvers and Darwin. This is lore introduced in the 4th Tinkerbell movie that very rarely fairies can be twins. Fairies are born of a baby's first laugh, and sometimes the laugh can split in 2, and then it turns into 2 fairies who are twins. I remember when I was a child and that movie came out, I was very upset at that new piece of lore. But Danvers and Darwin are twins, and one of them is wearing headphones and the other one has eye goggles. Then there's Axel. He's very brawny, and he has a gauntlet with a bunch of tools on it. And finally, there's Oswald, the fairy who Tink initially rushed at. He has some kind of book that he's carrying. Then we get some dialogue where Quinn is, interrogating Tink. A heliograph flying alone on the surface with a year's worth of pixie dust on her hip, just for the fun of it? You're up to something. Spill it. You don't have a bracelet. You're telling me you're not from the Clockwork Capital? And Tink says that she's a Neverland fairy. And they're like, Tinker talents don't come to the mainland from Neverland. And Tink is like, oh, well, things have changed. That was the plot of the first movie. Then Tink tries to explain the situation with Elmira and the necklace that she's looking for. And she has the drawing that Elmira did, and she gives it to Quinn. And Quinn is like, you drew it on a leaf? Never fairies really are as rustic as they say. What, do you live in acorns and eat sunflower seeds all day? But Quinn is like, well, the Dust Man might know, but Never fairies aren't allowed to come into Bleakwatch. And so Tink proposes a trade. She's like, you guys need my pixie dust, so I'll give you my pixie dust in exchange for you guys helping me find the necklace. And they agree. It seems like they're in sort of a desperate situation. I don't feel like they're really in a position to say no to a bunch of pixie dust. Then they all fly down to the base of Big Ben, and Tink realizes that they're all wearing the brass bracelets that Elmira was wearing. And Quinn uses their bracelet to open an invisible door, which does feel a little bit Tinker Academy. And they're like, Don't you have fairy doors back in Neverland? They're hidden all over the mainland so fairies can access them when they need a quick escape. All fairy doors are connected, and they all lead to Bleakwatch. Apparently, the doors are made by shadow talents, which is a talent that we have never heard of before. And Tink is like, how come Never Fairies have never seen these doors? And Quinn is like, they're to hide us from the humans and also the Never Fairies. So they all go through this secret door into an underground city made of repurposed human items. And the ceiling of the cave or the tunnel or whatever this is covered in glowing mushrooms. We get a little bit of Quinn's perspective, and they're worried about how the Dust Man is going to react to Tinkerbell. And we learn that the Dust Man's name is Maddox. He's like their boss. Flutterpunks scavenge human items and bring them to Maddox, who then pays them in dust. As Tink and the Flutterpunks are flying through the city, fairy guards in armor stop them. They're like, who's this fairy? And why is she dressed in leaves? And Quinn bluffs them out of it, like, oh, it's a new initiative from Maddox to dress someone up like a Neverland fairy so that then they can scout. It's kind of a stupid idea, but I'm not going to question the boss, you know? See you later, bye. And they're like, we need to get Tink a new outfit. And Tink's like, how are we going to do that? And Quinn's like, we're going to buy one. Buy one? Tinkerbell blinked in confusion. Yeah, you know, commerce, exchange of goods and services. She looked at them blankly. What, you don't shop where you're from? Tink shook her head. I'm not sure I understand. In Pixie Hollow, when a fairy needs something, the community just gives it to them. So, Tinkerbell is introduced to the concept of capitalism. And Quinn is like, no, we're going to go to a clothing store and we're going to pay with your pixie dust. So they keep flying through the city. And Tink notices that every fairy has one of those bracelets and also looks very dull. Like they're not glowing very brightly. Their wings don't look very good. And she's like, it almost looks like all of these fairies have dust deprivation. Then they all make it to the clothing shop. And the owner of the clothing shop can see that Tink has a ton of pixie dust. So he's trying to be very polite. But he's like, what the hell is she wearing? And Quinn's like, yeah, she wants something more traditional. And he's like, oh, thank God. So the shop owner starts bringing out a bunch of clothes. And Darwin and Danvers are very excited. They're like suggesting different things to Tink. And Tink is like, ooh, maybe something kind of practical and not like a ruffled evening gown. And then the shop owner asks Tink what her talent is. Would it be impertinent to inquire as to the madam's talent? The clothier asked demurely. It's my understanding that you heliographs often allude to them through your outfits. Oh, Tink said, well, I'm a tinker. I do like that in this book, Tink comes across like very bubbly and nice and naive. Like, oh, huh. And so the shop owner's like, okay, cool. And then he goes into a back room. Then Tink asks Quinn, like, what's a heliograph? And Quinn is reluctantly like, well, they're the aristocrats. They're not from here. They're from the capital city. And they don't wear the brass bracelets. So that's why everyone is assuming that you're a heliograph, because you don't have the bracelet. And they're like, when we get to Maddox, he can do a better job of explaining it. And Tink's like, when we get to Maddox, everything's going to be cool, right? Like, it's going to be okay? And Quinn swears on their pocket watch that everything is going to be okay. Quinn has a little fairy-sized pocket watch that they call Little Ben, like Big Ben. A reward from Maddox for my very first scavenge, Quinn said proudly. See, he's not so bad. At this point, the rest of the Flutterpunks, other than Quinn, are starting to really warm up to Tink. Oswald is a nerd, so he likes that Tink is asking questions and being very curious. Darwin and Danvers seem to kind of like her immediately, but Axel was also starting to help with, like, the clothing picking out. You know, when you go to a store and pick clothing. Then the shop owner comes back out, and in the time he's been gone, he has made Tink a new outfit, which is the outfit that she's wearing on the cover of the book and also in her character portrait, and it is the outfit I am cosplaying. Then Tink pays with pixie dust. She, like, takes a scoop out of the pouch on her waist, and she's like, is this enough? And the store owner's reaction is very much, that is enough. She is overpaying for this outfit. The tailor then held up his wrist and opened a small chamber in the bracelet that encircled it. He poured the dust deftly into the chamber. So the bracelets also hold pixie dust. And Tink is a little bummed out by this whole capitalism thing. Still, a small amount of dust had meant such a great deal to the clothier. Did the fairies of Bleakwatch really survive on so little? For the first time, Tink found herself wondering where the mainland dust even came from. Surely they couldn't grow pixie dust trees all the way down here. Perhaps there really wasn't enough to go around. And then the group all goes to the Flutterpunks' hideout. Maddox gets first pick of what they scavenge, but they've been able to keep some things over the years. So their hideout is full of human trinkets. Their beds are made of like a human candy bowl and sardine tins that have been thoroughly washed. I appreciate the clarification. And Quinn is laying in bed and they're worried about pixie dust. Maddox has been raising their quota of how many scavenged items they need to give him and decreasing their dust payout. And Quinn hopes that bringing Tink to Maddox will be a big deal, and Maddox will give them all a bunch of dust, and maybe they can even get an audience with the king, and they can tell him about how bad things are. Then Quinn dreams about when they arrived at Bleakwatch. So we learn that fairies arrive at Bleakwatch, like the baby's laugh comes to Bleakwatch. And when Quinn arrived, they participated in a talent-choosing ceremony, very similar to the one that Tinkerbell experienced in the first movie. And Bleakwatch has talents that we've never heard of, like shadow talents and dream talents. But at the end of the ceremony, Quinn is talentless. And Maddox is like, oh, it's nothing to be ashamed of. And he gives them a bracelet and a pinch of dust. And he's like, only the first pinch is free. Then the next day, the Flutterpunks are going to take Tinkerbell to Maddox. He lives at the factory. The dream engines use a special material called dream dross to power the city, Oz explained to Tink. It's collected by dream talents from the magic of human dreams. Okay. And at the top of this factory, there's the arrival day chamber. And that's where Maddox is. And Tink is like, oh, arrival day. Like they arrive here. We just learned from the dream sequence. Then they go to Maddox, and he sees Tink and is immediately suspicious. He's like, I don't know who you are. That's weird. I know who everyone is. And they explain that Tink is from Pixie Hollow, and she's a Tinker talent. And Maddox is like, Tinker talents don't come to the mainland. And Tink is like, oh, they do now. She's like, he's not buying it. What can I do to prove it? So she takes Quinn's pocket watch, the little Ben, because the pocket watch is stopped. It doesn't work. So Tink is like, okay, well maybe if I fix this pocket watch, then that'll prove that I'm a tinker. And she successfully fixes it, which now Maddox's expression has shifted, because tinkers are very important in Bleakwatch. King Bartleby is a tinker. And Maddox is like, it's a wonder my scavengers haven't seen you before, but that's aeronauts for you. And Tink's like, what's an aeronaut? And Maddox says to Quinn, like, oh, you haven't told her yet? It's nothing to be ashamed of. Heliographs live in the capital city, and they don't wear the bracelets. And aeronauts live here, and they wear the bracelets because they don't have a talent. And they work in the factory or collecting trinkets. And Tink is like, but every fairy has a talent. That's like our whole thing. Quinn gets very embarrassed and defensive. Then Tink feels bad and also a little bit suspicious. And do all the aeronauts answer to you? Tink asked Maddox. Her eyes roved suspiciously around the arrival day chamber. I see you still have questions, Maddox said, fluttering forward. That makes sense. You're a tinker after all. You're curious by nature, just like our great King Bartleby. The Sparrowman's friendly smile vanished, gone as quickly and fully as if he had lifted a mask. And he will definitely be curious about you, Maddox nodded to one of the armored fairies. Grab her. So then Tinkerbell is captured, and Maddox takes her pixie dust. Tink calls to the Flutterpunks for help, but they're all scared of Maddox, so they don't do anything. The guards take Tink to the Clockwork Capital, and it's beautiful. Where the Flutterpunks live, which I don't think I've mentioned, is called the Gnome Market. It's very cobbled together and run down, versus this capital city which has beautiful architecture, and everyone's using flying machines like Almira's. No one's wearing bracelets, and there's pixie dust everywhere. Like, literally just like fountains of pixie dust. And the guards take Tink to the palace, which is made of like moving clockwork. Then we cut back to Quinn's POV. The Flutterpunks are all shocked and upset that Tink just got taken in front of them. And Quinn says to Maddox, like, we actually made a deal with Tink for that pixie dust. And Maddox is like, oh, no, I mean, all of your scavenging comes through me first, so I am going to keep this. But you have earned a bonus. Quinn feels stupid that they played this so badly and they couldn't protect Tink. Later, in the Flutterpunks' hideout, they're all upset that they didn't try harder to save Tink. Quinn is being very defensive. And Oswald quietly chimes in that Tink fixed little Ben, because Oswald knows how much the watch means to Quinn. Oswald and Quinn were the first to become friends, and they started scavenging together. And on their first trip out, Quinn was really drawn to this pocket watch, this like human pocket watch that they saw in a shop window. And they wanted to steal it, and they almost got caught. But Maddox really liked it, and as a reward, he gave Quinn a fairy-sized pocket watch. He had gotten it as like a payment for a business debt or something, and the watch was broken, but it made Quinn feel special. Tink fixed it, and so then Quinn relents. They're like, okay, I think we should try and find the necklace that Tink was looking for, and then go and rescue Tink. Then back to Tink's POV. Tink was taken to King Bartleby's chambers, and the room is full of like tools and gadgets and like stuff that he's working on because he's a tinker fairy. And King Bartleby is very nice. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry that Maddox's guards were so rough with you. And he says to the guards, like, go back and tell Maddox that all fairies should be treated with respect. And then King Bartleby explains his whole backstory. So he was a tinker talent in Neverland, and he wasn't allowed to go to the mainland. Very similar to Tink in the first movie. And so he decided he was going to go on his own. So he made a flying machine, but the journey wasn't as smooth as he thought. So he landed on the mainland with no pixie dust left. And he was like, oh no, I'm screwed, because now I just have to walk on the ground so any like passing raccoon could eat me. Do they have raccoons in England? I'm going to assume they do. So King Bartleby went underground, and he found a miracle. And then he takes Tink to this giant pixie dust mushroom. It's like a mushroom the size of the pixie dust tree, which is like a maple tree. Like, it's not like a small fairy-sized tree. It's like a normal tree. So it's this huge mushroom underground. And similar to the pixie dust tree, it's like creating pixie dust. And Tink is like, how is this here? And he's like, I don't know. He mentions that maybe fairies from Neverland coming to the mainland, their pixie dust that they shed and like left behind maybe made its way underground and grew this mushroom. Or maybe this mushroom has always been there. Who knows? Don't worry about it. And so King Bartleby was building like a settlement next to this giant mushroom. And he was going to go back to Neverland to tell everyone like, oh my god, look at this crazy thing I found. But then Maddox arrived. And Maddox was a dust talent fairy. And King Bartleby was like, well, now this is not like a Neverland colony. Now this is like its own thing. So I think I need to keep this community a secret from Pixie Hollow. Because he didn't trust Queen Clarion, who at this point was very young and was not receptive to him wanting to go to the mainland in the first place. And initially, King Bartleby was concerned because this mushroom was going to have to be refreshed just like the pixie dust tree. The pixie dust tree, as we know from the second movie, has to be refreshed with the power of the moon. Otherwise, it will stop creating pixie dust. But they're underground. We don't know how deep underground, but underground. So they can't get the moon to this mushroom. But then came the dream talents, and they discovered that they could refresh the mushroom with the dream dross that is collected by the dream talents from human dreams. This part of the story, the King Bartleby exposition, feels a little bit like trying to get ahead of plot holes. Like, oh, well, based on the second movie, you need to refresh it because the moon, so... well, what if there's like a different substance that could refresh it and it's like a dream thing or something, you know? Like, it's maybe a little bit too much lore, a little bit convoluted. Bartleby says that then fairies started arriving without talents. And these fairies who didn't have talents could get dream dross poisoning. So if they came into contact with the dream dross substance, they would get sick. So the metal bracelets protect them from the dream dross poisoning. And Tink is like, well, the aeronauts aren't getting dream dross poisoning, but they're still struggling. Like, they don't have enough pixie dust. Sad as it is, the king replied, the aeronauts are talentless. Dust augments magic. Without talents to augment, it stands to reason they'd need less dust, wouldn't you say? Tink pressed forward. My opinions aside, the truth is we're not even talking about less dust. Your Majesty, Maddox is forcing them to get by on next to nothing. And Bartleby is like, well, I've been giving Maddox free reign to rule over the Arnauts because I wanted to be over here working on my inventions. But maybe I've been an absent ruler for too long. Then we cut back to the Flutterpunks. Their plan is to break into Maddox's office because he has records of all of the trinkets and everything that has been scavenged. And so if there's this necklace, he would probably have a record of it. So they're waiting outside of Maddox's office to do this heist because Maddox is in there. He's like reading a book and then he puts the book away into a secret compartment. And the Flutterpunks are like, ah, that must have all of the records in it. That must be the like important secret book. So then Maddox leaves and they start their heist. And it follows each of them doing their part of the heist with their gadgets. And there's this funny running bit where each of them thinks that their part is the most important. The heist goes well, they're able to steal the book, but then Maddox is on his way back. So Quinn, who was the one who actually did the thieving, hides under Maddox's desk. And then while his back is turned, they slip out. Then they show the book to the other Flutterpunks, and Oswald is like, I can't read this, it's in code. And Quinn is like, that's okay, because look what I found. And it turns out in the back of the book there was a secret compartment and that's where the necklace was. And they're like, okay, now we need to take this necklace and go rescue Tink. So they're flying into the clockwork capital. They're immediately stopped by guards. So they all scatter. And then there's more guards coming in who are flying on bats. The Neverland fairies also have tamed animals, but I guess since Bleakwatch is underground, there are bats, so they have tamed the bats. Quinn is able to fly the fastest and the quietest because they have gauntlets or some apparatus on their wings, which also makes them a more sneaky thief. So Quinn is able to fly the fastest and sort of outflies the guards and makes it to the castle and then crash lands on a balcony right at Tink's feet. And so Tinkerbell has King Bartleby bring in all the Flutterpunks, and then the Flutterpunks show Tink the necklace. And Tink is like, it looks like a locket. And she opens it, and inside is a fairy-sized key. And when Tink touches this key, it makes her feel cold and nauseous. She's like, that's really weird. And they're all kind of speculating, what is this key? What's going on? And then Tink has an epiphany and takes the key and unlocks Quinn's bracelet. And all the Flutterpunks are freaking out oh my god, the dream draw's poisoning. But Quinn takes a moment and they're like, actually, I feel really great. I feel better than when I was wearing the bracelet. And they're all like, well, I don't actually know what the effects of dream draw's poisoning are supposed to be. One of them's like, I thought it was supposed to be that your wings melted off. And then another one's like, I thought it was warts. You got big warts all over you. And Quinn is like, well, wings are fine, no warts. I think we're good. And so Tink takes all of their bracelets off. Darwin and Danvers, when they get their bracelets off, Darwin glows super bright for a moment. And Danvers has this inky blackness for a moment. And they're like, oh my god, you're a light talent and a shadow talent. And then when they hold hands, their wings start to sparkle, which is a thing that we know happens with fairy twins. And it had apparently never happened with Darwin and Danvers before. Then Oswald, once he gets his bracelet off, he's able to read the book that's in code. And Tink is like, oh, you're a scribe talent. And then Axel has dream dross around him for a moment, so he's a dream talent. We don't know what Quinn's talent is. And we realize that the bracelets have iron inside of them, which weakens fairies. Which I don't think had been lore before this. I know that it's very common fairy folklore, but I don't really remember them using it. At least not in the movies, I don't think. Someone fact check me. And Bartleby is like, oh no, well Maddox has been overseeing the construction of these bracelets. Maddox has been engineering the talentless epidemic this whole time? Tink asked. But why? Pixie dust, Oswald said with a sigh. He held the book up for everyone to see. It's all here. Maddox decided there wasn't enough dust to go around, so rather than sharing it among the talents, he suppressed those talents he decided weren't essential to the city, and those he felt were overpopulated. Maddox is a special kind of dust talent. He could actively suppress another fairy's talents for a short while, long enough to fit an iron bracelet onto their wrists. Then, with their talents quashed, he could rule over the aeronauts practically unchallenged. With the Heliographs living in a separate district, who would question him? And so Bartleby sends his guards to go capture Maddox. Maddox is brought in, and he's super pissed, specifically at Tinkerbell. Spare me your mercy, Never Fairy, Maddox spat. I neither need nor want it. You Pixie Hollow ninnies have no idea what it takes to survive in the harsh world of the humans. Mainland fairies must be tough. We must make sacrifices that you couldn't begin to imagine. We made those sacrifices, Quinn shouted, not you. And then Maddox tries to attack Tink, but he's taken away by the guards, and he's going to be locked away in a palace chamber until we can figure out what to do with him. And Tink is like, okay, well, I've gotten the necklace. This is clearly what Elmira wanted me to do, so I need to go home. And she tells Bartleby to take care of the Flutterpunks. And he's like, yeah, I'll make them my royal scavengers. Then they go to Kensington Gardens, and the Flutterpunks see Tink off. Bartleby had given Tink enough dust to operate the flying machine. And Tink is also bringing the key with her so she can unlock Elmira's bracelet. Elmira's key would be needed to free other aeronauts from Maddox's suppressive bracelets. At first, Tinkerbell had wondered if she should leave it with King Bartleby and the others, but the king had assured her that the gnome market could wait just a bit longer. So Tink and all the Flutterpunks hug, and then Tink comes home. And as she's flying to the beach, a bunch of fairies start coming over. Like, they figured out she left, and now they want to know what's up. And she tells the fairies that she needs to urgently talk to Queen Clarion. But first, she goes to Elmira and unlocks her bracelet. Elmira is still with the healing talents, and she still can't talk. And when Tink unlocks her bracelet, we find out that Elmira is a singing talent, so the bracelet was suppressing her voice. And as Tink is telling her what happened, Elmira is freaking out. Maddox wasn't the mastermind of the plot, Elmira said. She pulled Tink closer, her eyes wide and wild. Elmira looked absolutely terrified. King Bartleby is. The end. I really liked this book. It had a lot of little movie references, like mentioning side characters from the movies. Like, oh, Nyx, the scout from Legend of the Neverbeast. Which is actually a little bit odd because this book is for kids. And, like, are kids getting those references? Like, are they watching the Tinkerbell movies on Disney Plus or whatever? I mean, I guess they must be, because if they weren't a fan of Tinkerbell and the Tinkerbell movies, why would they be reading this book? There was maybe a little bit too much lore. The Flutterpunk heist chapters and Tink talking to Bartleby were switching POV. I combined some of the chapters for my retelling, but reading it, it was like, heist, lore, heist, more lore. I'm very forgiving when it comes to a lack of lore. You could just tell me, the mushroom's magical, don't worry about it. And I'd be like, sure, cool. So I appreciate that the author thought out this whole explanation, but I didn't really need it. I would have been fine. And then we left on a big cliffhanger. So first of all, what's Quinn's talent? They had a lot of clock imagery related to them, obviously being drawn to the human pocket watch and then getting their own pocket watch. And when they had that dream about their arrival, the baby whose laugh turned into Quinn, the baby was laughing at a cuckoo clock. It's just like a lot of clocks. The clockwork stuff feels very Tinker talent to me, being drawn to gadgets and clocks. And then it would make sense that their talent didn't immediately materialize when their bracelet got taken off, because how would a Tinker talent materialize? And then what's going on with Elmira? None of the Flutterpunks had heard of her. And then both Maddox and Bartleby said her name to themselves, like, Elmira. So maybe they know her. In which case she would probably have to be a heliograph, because that's the only way that the Flutterpunks would have never met her before. Unless, like, Elmira is a fake name, but then why would Maddox and Bartleby recognize it? But Elmira was wearing a bracelet, so maybe she was a heliograph who got a bracelet put on her when she started causing trouble. It's obviously not just Bartleby being evil. Maddox certainly seems plenty evil on his own, but he conveniently didn't rat Bartleby out. When the guards took him, he wasn't like, I was only following your orders. Like, he didn't say anything that would incriminate Bartleby. Listen, I like that we have an anti-capitalist Tinkerbell book. The world building's really cool. I love steampunk. I think the author did a great job. He clearly did his homework. Zach Lauren Clark, great job. I also really like the art in this book. The cover is by Khadija Khatib. It looks very cinematic. Apparently she's been doing a lot of the new Percy Jackson covers, which those are also very, like, dramatic. I also want to point out that the end papers are gears. Look at that. The interior art is by Hannah Chong Meyer, so she did the character portraits and I think the map, which unfortunately in the book it is printed in black and white, but you can see the color versions of the character portraits, and that's what I have shown in this video. The next Tinkerbell book that's coming out is Wings of Starlight, which comes out on February 4th. It is a YA romance novel between Queen Clarion and Lord Mallory. I was telling my friend about it, and she was like, "What are the words you just said?" I was like, "Ooh, right. I have not talked about the Tinkerbell movies on this channel." So my friend, who also did not grow up with the Tinkerbell movies, does not know that in the 4th Tinkerbell Secret of the Wings, it is revealed that Queen Clarion, the Queen of Pixie Hollow, and Lord Mallory, who is the Lord of the Winter Land, used to be in love. But warm weather fairies, so fairies who aren't from the Winter Realm, can't go into the Winter Realm because it's too cold for their wings. They'll freeze or whatever. So the two of them being in love and having a relationship was too dangerous. So this book is going to be them falling in love and then realizing that they can't be together because of the winter barrier, because they don't get back together until the 4th movie. I don't know how excited I am for this book. I'm not super into the lore that they introduced in Secret of the Wings, and I don't particularly care about this couple. It is funny that they're the only canon couple in the Tinkerbell franchise. There's just not romance in the Tinkerbell world. Terrence has a crush on Tinkerbell. In Secret of the Wings, there's Queen Clarion and Lord Mallory. Rosetta has a crush on another winter fairy, but that's it. The Wings of Starlight book is written by Alison Saft, which she wrote the book A Dark and Drowning Tide, which is currently a Goodreads Choice Award nominee for the romantasy category. I have not read any of her work, but A Dark and Drowning Tide does have a beautiful cover, so I'm definitely gonna read Wings of Starlight, but, we'll see if I like it. Then there's graphic novels coming out. There were graphic novels years ago which were reusing the comics in the magazines. So there were Tinkerbell magazines, and there were comics in those, and they repurposed them to be graphic novels. And so now these graphic novels are being republished in compilations. So 4 volumes in one. One came out in September, and then there are 2 available for pre-order. One is coming out in December and one in March. The idea of republishing old Disney fairy stuff is very intriguing to me. I would love if they republished the Gail Carson Levine Tinkerbell books, as collector's editions or something. Or even not as collector's editions, just normal editions so that they're back in circulation. There's also Nevergirls graphic novels. The Nevergirls is a book series about human girls traveling to Pixie Hollow. 2 Nevergirls graphic novels came out in 2023, and 1 came out in September. I struggle when images and text are integrated. So graphic novels, comics, manga, any of that. I need my text to be separate. So I'm probably not gonna read any of these, even though the collector part of my brain is it's Disney fairies, you have to buy it. But I'm very happy they exist. Then the last piece of news is a new Tinkerbell ride at Tokyo Disney. So if you don't know, Tokyo has their own Disney parks. There's 2 of them right next to each other. So Tokyo Disneyland and Tokyo Disney Sea. The parks are right next to each other, but you do need separate tickets for each park. And Tokyo Disney Sea got a big expansion with a new land called Fantasy Springs. It opened on June 6th, 2024. Fantasy Springs has areas for different movies. So there's a Frozen area, a Rapunzel area, and a Neverland area. And in the Neverland area, there is a Tinkerbell ride called Fairy Tinkerbell's Busy Buggies. It's just a slow-moving outdoor kids ride, but it is extremely cute. The concept is that you've shrunk down to the size of a fairy, and now you're traveling in this little basket through the different seasons in Pixie Hollow. It reminds me a lot of Heimlich's Choo Choo Train. In Disney's California Adventure, there used to be a land focused on the movie A Bug's Life. And the concept of that land was that you have shrunk down to the size of a bug, and there's all these giant plants and repurposed human items. and there was a ride called Heimlich's Choo Choo Train, which was a slow outdoor ride that just sort of traveled around giant items of food. Bugs Life Land has been replaced by a Marvel Land, so a very themed, cute area replaced by slabs of concrete. But Fantasy Springs in Tokyo looks amazing. My understanding is that it's very hard to get into right now. It's very new, but probably in a few years it'll be fine. And then this is not new, but the Tokyo Disneyland Hotel has had a Tinkerbell room option for years. So they have standard rooms and then they have character-themed rooms, and one of them is Tinkerbell. And these rooms are adorable. I wish that I lived there. So obviously I would very much like to go to Tokyo Disney and see all this Tinkerbell stuff. I actually went to Tokyo Disney Sea last year. I went on this group trip to Japan, and one of the days I went alone to Tokyo Disneyland. Because I have health problems, I knew I probably wouldn't be able to stay that long, so I didn't want to invite one of the other girls to come with me and then be like, I gotta bounce. I figured I'd have more flexibility if I went alone. I did get extremely lost and confused trying to get there, which it was very straightforward. It was like, go to this train station, go to the bus area, and take this bus. But I have the sense of direction of bad. I don't know. I want to say it took me like almost 2 hours, and I was able to get on like the last bus. I was at the point where I was like, if I can't find my way, I'm just going to go back to the hotel room and go to sleep. But I did in fact make it. And all the theme park enthusiasts are correct. Tokyo Disney Sea is amazing. I only did Disney Sea because I knew I'd probably only be able to do one park, and Disney Sea is considered the better park. And even at the time, I was annoyed because I knew that the Tinkerbell ride was coming and I was going to miss it by a year. But one day I will return and hopefully stay in the Tinkerbell hotel room. So those are all the exciting new Tinkerbell things. It's exciting that they seem to be putting energy into the brand, and I'll be happy if all we get is more books. I don't really think we're gonna get another Tinkerbell movie. I just don't think that's in the cards. The Tinkerbell movies were DVD releases, so they made a lot of money from like people buying the DVDs. Whereas now, that's not a thing anymore. So if they made a Tinkerbell movie, it would have to be direct to streaming. And streaming doesn't make money directly in that same way, right? A movie goes up on streaming and it's just part of the bundled cost of your subscription. It's not like each individual movie is making money. So now that the movies can't directly make money, earn their keep in that same way, I don't think they're going to make more of them. And I definitely don't think they'd do a theatrical release Tinkerbell movie. But this might be overly optimistic, but I do think we could maybe get like an animated series, like a preschool cartoon that could air on Disney Junior or something. Something like Sophia the First. Fairies and magic and Pixie Hollow and like learning lessons about friendship. I know originally the Disney Fairies brand was to appeal to a pre-tween audience, so like older kids. So I don't know if they'd want to do a series aimed at young kids. But I don't know, I think there's something there. Kids love fairies. It's crazy to me that they're not using the Tinkerbell brand to like make as much fairy merchandise as possible. Like fairies and mermaids, kids are always gonna like that. Maybe I'm naive, but I think you could just keep making Tinkerbell content forever and it'll keep doing good, like the Disney fairies. I hope you liked this. I kind of just wanted to make a casual video where I talked about Tinkerbell news. As these news items kept happening, none of them were enough for a full video, so I've just been saving them up. Hopefully it was interesting. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can subscribe. I am Sarah Seraph on all social media, even if I don't post that much. I am often lurking though, just scrolling around. And as always, all the sources I used are in a Google Doc linked in the description. I realized I should start saying that because sometimes people ask about my sources. That's always where they are. And I don't know how to end a YouTube video. So, bye! Oh my god, I'm so excited to take this hair out. Get it off of me.